Welcome to Streams, Lakes, and Deltas, not a nature podcast, presented by Rearc and its partners. Each week we talk about data, AI, and everything in between. Hosted by Weston Kimbrough, a lead data engineer, Databricks champion, and passionate tech evangelist. This week we are joined by Kevin Formsma. He is a principal engineer at Rearc who covers multiple disciplines, the brains behind Rearc's internal Databricks Center of Excellence, and an avid explorer of America's national parks. Tune in as they talk about the Center of Excellence at Rearc and what its purpose is, discuss how this program supports and accelerates our internal Databricks engineers, and learnings you can take away to implement your own COE at your organization. Here we go.
I am Weston Kimbrough. This is Streams, Lakes, and Deltas, not a nature podcast. We are joined here today by one of Rearc's greatest, Kevin. Welcome, Kevin. Glad to have you on here.
Thanks, Weston. Hey, my name is Kevin. I'm one of the principal engineers here at Rearc. Been here, I don't know, a couple of years now, 3, 4, something like that. My background was originally in cloud engineering, and now I'm here in the data engineer space, and happy to be doing it, and looking forward to our conversation. So yeah, I am one of the Databricks partner champions, and heavily involved in a lot of our different Databricks engagements and partnership.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on here. I know we've even mentioned you in previous episodes, you know, in the COE and things like that. So I'm pretty excited to dig into it and kind of get an idea of what it actually takes to run it, how we run it, why we run it, and things like that, and kind of talk about that. And for those of you that don't know, COE stands for Center of Excellence. So Kevin here runs our Databricks Center of Excellence and just kind of make sure that we're keeping up with our, you know, Databricks skills and all of that, since we are a partner with them. So just kind of walk me through like why have a COE, right? Like why does this even make sense to run something like that?
Yeah, and definitely we can. The COE has kind of taken a couple different forms over the years, but I think the biggest benefit is around building a community of engineers that are able to talk the tech and are comfortable with each other, right? And have resources that when they need to review something or have a challenge that they're trying to work through, they know where to go, right? So our Databricks COE kind of provides that landing spot to both facilitate like the training of engineers as they're working on projects, as well as being, you know, that support network for them to be able to get their questions answered. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I know a big one, you know, even I've leaned on it before and kind of asked questions randomly, like, hey, has anyone encountered this or things like that? So it's definitely useful to have that kind of as a backdrop. But I guess really, like, how did this come about? Like, who decided, oh, we should have a COE, we should be running this, we should be kind of doing this thing?
Yeah. No, it really started when Rearc got our first partner champion. So Ayush was our first champion here at Rearc. He initially established the Databricks COE as part of that program to just get us talking and meeting with each other, right? And when I became a Databricks champion, I kind of took over ownership of the COE, and it's kind of evolved from there, right? I think it's really important, you know, to the leadership of Rearc to have this group, right, that's focused heavily on our partnership and the things that I can provide, as well as making sure the engineers get the training and other resources that they need, right? And so initially the COE was, you know, like a 30-minute call that we ran every couple of weeks, right? And it's kind of evolved from there. We do a couple different things now to kind of bring forth, you know, interaction, and we're always open to new ideas as well. So, you know, it'll evolve continuing into the future too. So.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? Like as we get more people involved, you know, train people up more, I think the competency level has risen even since I've been here. So as part of that, it kind of makes sense that we change it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Rather than like a standard Q&A kind of format, you know, or going over release notes and stuff to like, hey, someone did something cool, let's present it, right?
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
we did that the other day, so.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good for us to have a mix of different, you know, session types, if you will, right? And I know you've been diving into, you know, our open office hours, right? So one of the things that the COE does is we have a regular cadence for an hour. Sometimes it goes a little bit longer than that, but it's essentially just an agendaless session, right? Where we don't come in with a presentation or talk about what's latest and greatest in Databricks. We just sit on a call together as Databricks, experts and practitioners and people that are learning and on their journey, right? And people can pop in and out as they need to. And I think that's been really helpful. And I think we've had a lot of good conversations that just flow naturally from that kind of open format. So I've been happy to see that this year so far.
Yeah, I know sometimes even in the office hours, you get the impromptu presentation occasionally.
Oh, that happens too, right? But yeah, no, it's all good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting concept, right? And something that, I've seen at some places in consulting and haven't seen in others. So I guess really, we've kind of talked a little bit around the benefits of running a COE, but haven't like explicitly said like this is why you should be doing it. This is why it makes the most sense. So maybe talk to me a little bit about that. Like what benefits have you seen? Like have you seen, I guess kind of the fruit of your labor for this? Have you seen people really like excel or things like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think like the biggest benefit changes I've seen are people kind of starting at Rearc, right, with little Databricks experience, or even like I did, which was entirely like in the cloud sphere, right, where I was a cloud consultant. I did CI/CD pipelines. I didn't touch Databricks at all, right? And now I'm a Databricks champion, right? And so I've really enjoyed seeing other folks from that background kind of excel and kind of take on and learn a new skill set, a new domain, basically entirely, right? In the COE is able to support them and do that, right? So you see engineers that take their first associate Databricks cert, right? And we celebrate those wins and we help cheer them on. And now some of those folks are becoming Databricks partner champions themselves, right? And so that whole full journey kind of really accelerates their knowledge and confidence, and then they go and bring that confidence to our clients and help facilitate whatever project they're working on, and it just builds that reputation for Rearc, that we're doing a great job. And I enjoy kind of that learning aspect, right, and seeing everyone kind of grow through their challenges, as well as like it exposes me to new things too, right? I don't know everything about Databricks, or not an expert in every particular area, so it's really great to see someone might be really good on the security side of Databricks, or someone else is really good on pipeline ingestion, and someone else has done a lot of data quality work, right? And we can bring those and stitch those different experiences together at the COE and kind of share and broadcast those lessons learned across the organization. So hopefully they don't happen in silos, right? Kind of, people are focused on a project and they're doing that great work on that project, but if it doesn't get shared to the broader org, it becomes harder for us to repeat that great work somewhere else, right? Without having that particular resource. So the COE really helps us there as well.
Yeah, I know too, we recently made like a transition on where we're storing, documents and stuff like that. But like how much of like a note-taking aspect is this as well, right? I know some of it now is a little more automated with the tools we've introduced, but
yeah,
how much of that is just, hey, someone did this, someone brought it up in the COE, right? We took note of it, we mentioned it, and now other people get to go use that, later on, right? How much of that do you see like going on in the COE, or how much of it is just more organic of conversation where someone comes in, has someone done this, have someone done that, and then we kind of, I remember that.
I think there's a lot of organic still happening, right, between internal communication channels and things like that, and people talking to, hey, this person had this question at a COE, so maybe I'm going to go message them. There's still a lot of that happening. I think as our COE continues to evolve and mature, formalizing that into a better documentation system of like, hey, we really did this great data quality pipeline work over at this project, and here's a summary of it, and making it accessible to engineers would be a really an improvement upon what we're doing right now. But we do have documentation for our sessions that we do have, where we're taking notes and capturing kind of the conversation. So that is there and has been helpful. In particular, we have a internal Slack channel, which I kind of treat as documentation, right? Where I've always kind of continuously dropping, notes, or, hey, here's this cool new feature, and we have a thread and we chat through it. So there's some documentation there as well. But definitely kind of improving that would be high on our list, and kind of making that available. And that naturally leads into, the development of more solutions, right? Like things like brick builders or prepackaged solutions. The more that we kind of can move forward with that documentation, so definitely kind of see that as an evolution maturity of our COE as we carry on.
Yeah, I know, you bring up brick builders, and I think that's something interesting that people kind of outside of this space aren't going to be as familiar with.
Yeah.
And especially given, last episode we had, Dylan on, right, who I think is directly involved in some of the brick builder type stuff. So kind of, I think we even mentioned it last episode. So kind of walk me through, like, what is a brick builder? Like, why would we care about that? Why is that attached to the CO?
Yeah, so a brick builder is essentially a framework for building a repeatable solution that's built onto the Databricks platform, right? So rather than doing kind of unique one-off implementations at different clients or customers, we can take some of the lessons that we've learned from all of our previous engagements and experience and kind of package those into a best practice solution that we can deliver quickly and consistently, right, to multiple different projects and clients, right? And it really helps a partner kind of scale out a little bit, right? Rather than doing, a bunch of unique engagements, if we can package and build out a solution that we deliver that becomes much more consistent. So yeah, we've kind of evolved a couple different brick builders over the years. We've done a couple. I think I would love to see us do more, right? It takes some effort to kind of take, an implementation or lessons that we've learned from a particular project and build that into a, repeatable solution that can be used across multiple clients, right? There's definitely work there involved. And, having the COE at least gives us a place to discuss the ideas for the brick builder and be like, hey, I did this, and does this make sense as a brick builder? Or, myself or you or other champions, right, will ask like, hey, that was really cool. What about making that into a repeatable solution, a bigger thing, right? And so we'll start kind of those conversations. But yeah, brick builders, they become an asset, right, that the company kind of owns and is able to deliver beyond just, our traditional Databricks expertise, from the excellent engineers that we have.
Yeah, and I know too, right, like you mentioned the like scale of difficulty, right, of kind of, hey, you did this over here, now we have to make it something more like generic, right? It becomes kind of awkward at that point because sometimes you're looking at code you wrote for a client and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to strip so much like business logic or special rules they had me do and things like that. And then at that point, there's even an evaluation. Is this actually useful at that point, right? Is this something that someone would find use out of? Or did I just do something, rip everything out and now I have, read the data?
Now I have a skeleton that's not super useful, right? Yeah, so that evaluation, right, I think is a great, is having that is really important, in having the group of engineers that we have to be able to discuss that, right? Be like, before we go through all this work, does this make sense, right? I think it's an important question to ask as we develop those solutions, for sure.
So going back to kind of the COE and running it and things like that. So what is your kind of like mentality around the COE? How are you prepping for it? What are you thinking, day of when you're running it, things like that? Or is it something that you've kind of developed over time and now you don't really think about it too much? And how did that change, right? How did you get there?
Yeah. I think a good COE is one that doesn't require a lot of preparation, right? Like we're all busy folks, and I don't want this to become someone's full-time job necessarily. Maybe we'll get to that point where someone is like a full-time owner of the COE, but that's not the case here at Rearc right now. So I guess my preparation has decreased over time just as I've gotten more comfortable with running the COEs. So we really have two different kind of sessions. So one is the open office hours session that we mentioned previously, right? And obviously there's no prep for that. Like, that's intentional, which is helpful for both, our champions and myself that are kind of organizers of those events, and kind of just jump in and just have a conversation with whomever about whatever topic. It doesn't need to be, prepared or shiny. Our other session that we have is more of an agendaed session. And so that definitely takes some preparation. I try to mix, different sessions between those. We had those once a month essentially, and mix between like having someone present on a topic, right? Whether that's, some new feature or a case study that they've completed, something like that. So I'll kind of keep my eye out for different people that have done something interesting, and I'll hit them up on the side and be like, hey, have you thought about talking about that at the Databricks COE, right? And then often, more often than not, they're like, sure, that sounds great, right? And then I'll kind of throw them onto our calendar. The other type of, kind of agenda COE that we have is kind of perusing through the Databricks release notes, which I see it sounds kind of tedious, but it's a pretty good way, at least for me personally, to like, what is Databricks, pushing out? What are they, moving fast in, right? Like you can just kind of glance through the month's, headline releases in the platform release notes and get an idea for where their focus is. And I usually go through and pick, 4 or 5 things to kind of highlight from that month's releases, and we'll have, a conversation, as you're well aware, as you attend the session. But that I can do, kind of like the week of, right? So it doesn't really require a lot of planning. I just kind of go through those release notes and kind of pick things that make sense. And then the other kind of area that we talk about a lot at the Databricks COE is kind of the Rearc Databricks partnership, any, kind of training goals or certifications, other things that are going to be both helpful for Rearc and helpful for engineers, right? I like to find things that are not just useful for, the company, but they're useful to kind of benefit that individual engineer as well, and kind of promote those as well at the meeting. So there's a little bit of prep there to kind of track, where we are with certain elements there, but it's not a ton for sure. And I guess my favorite sessions would be ones where, I bring in a guest speaker of sorts, right? And they kind of talk through their thing, because I think we really get more, hands-on experience and knowledge. But yeah, we have a variety of different things, and I try to keep the prep work kind of minimal. One challenge I think we do have is that obviously Rearc has engineers kind of all over the US and all over the world right now, right? And so we've kind of been battling with how do we establish or run a center of excellence, across many time zones, where it might not be convenient for everybody to join, a particular session. So that's been something that we've been kind of working out over the past, year or so as well.
Yeah, I almost feel like we're headed towards maybe like multiple COEs based across time zones, right? And
Yeah.
kind of mirror what each one is doing, or maybe even steering away depending on what the needs are, right? Like we have a whole group on, kind of out in India as well as Australia, right? So kind of lumping them together, there might be particular needs that they are looking for, right? That we're not necessarily looking for in kind of the core US time zones, right? So,
Yeah. And there is, so one of the champions in India actually runs his own COE sessions, which is like, the middle of the morning for us in the US, right? So I think that's been working well. I think the challenge is just like, I don't want to become, a siloed COE thing. So kind of thinking through different ways to kind of remove those boundaries, whether that's, we have video recordings of all the COEs, or we try to get together and do one big session, right? Or some of the kind of ideas I'm floating around. And I think one of the things we were talking about earlier about, documentation pieces, improving that is going to help kind of keep, from fracturing a little bit too much as we have more globally distributed in place. So.
Yeah, you mentioned documentation, like we don't do enough of it. And I'll be totally honest with you. I think we document better here than most places I've been to. But it feels like something you're constantly like chasing your own tail, like, oh, I should have documented that, right? And you're constantly thinking that. So
yeah,
I think no pressure there, right? I think we're actually one of the better ones about documenting. But so how do things come into the COE that maybe someone wants to present or talk about, and how does that kind of become something of like a lesson learned? Like, say, for example, someone comes in and really they didn't actually write anything new for a client, right? But maybe they refactored like 10 different pipelines, right? And they kind of had a process they walked through. Maybe they wrote some code to help with that process, things like that. how do we kind of determine, oh, that's something we want to like pick up and present at the COE, and how do we ensure that those same like lessons learned like kind of carry over to others?
Yeah. So I kind of rely on kind of the different delivery leads that we have at Rearc, right? That are on those individual projects to kind of see what's interesting or what makes sense to kind of reuse, as well as looking at, our overall sales pipeline. What projects are we likely to take on in the future to see, what's most useful to invest in terms of, pulling out those lessons learned. I think a common example would be like a migration pattern, right? Where we're doing a migration from whatever into Databricks from some pre-existing system, right? And obviously, as engineers work on those projects, right, they build tooling, they build best practices about how to do that migration, things to watch out for. Those I find to be super valuable from a COE perspective, because they're very easily repeatable lessons learned. Typically, they have a kind of narrow application window, right? Where like I can, if I'm moving from this platform to this other platform, right, that's something very specific, is searchable. I can document it really well. So those are, kind of really high priority ones, or easy targets, I guess, for us to pick up, within the COE, give a talk on, document those lessons learned into a documentation, the pieces that we're talking about. I think some of the harder ones are where we're kind of developing, entirely new pipelines for a customer on their, particular unique data set, right? And those might not translate very well, to another customer. Maybe some of the lessons learned that we can share there that have happened, are just around Databricks platform type best practices, rather than, this specific data set or this particular, pipeline destination. Because those are unique, across customers quite frequently. But we'll definitely share, like, hey, I was using, this declarative pipeline and I did this stupid thing, and please don't do this stupid thing that I've already done. We'll bring those lessons back into the COE, which is great. And I kind of, hopefully, I as a delivery lead, like when I'm on a project, I'm looking for kind of those type of events that happen, as I'm on my stand up with my engineers, and then I can like, hey, do you want to talk about that? Bring them aside, and kind of work with the other delivery leads to do the same within their teams, because I don't have eyes and ears everywhere to be able to kind of pull in those resources to talk at the session. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, and I know too, like you mentioned, like customer specific things, and this is where I'll kind of, shout out to Aaron, who was on the last episode, for taking something like data modeling, right, which is kind of generic, right? And we know, you and I know, right, the more specific details that kind of went into that, and how he kind of had to walk a thin line of, maybe I don't reveal too much outside of internal, right? Because there's a lot of business logic and things like that involved. And, he can't explicitly say like, oh, we did a star schema and here's their facts and dems and all that, or things like that. So like props to him, right, for focusing on something, and he probably got some prep, I'm guessing, from you or others, right, of saying like, hey, maybe focus on the fact that we use metric views, right? And how we use them, right? How we actually use these calculations that were repeatable and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I worked with Aaron, as he was kind of preparing for his session that he did at Summit, right? And definitely kind of talk through like what's most interesting, right? Or what are the details that we can share that are be helpful for other Databricks practitioners, right? And focusing on those without, giving away too much client information, or, breaking some sort of contract that we have with someone. Another kind of way that the COE plays into that maybe a little bit different topic, but like it's a friendly space, right? So if people are preparing for other sessions and things like that, other conferences, the talks that we did at Summit or at other places, or even, a presentation to a client, like if you want to dry run through something, the Databricks COE is a great place for it, right? Because none of us are, we'll give you that honest feedback, but like, we're a friendly place. We're not going to beat you up on something. And so I think that worked out well for Aaron and others that have kind of done that process. And we're kind of happy to do that and give people that feedback. So,
Yeah, I definitely think like a space to present, right? It's something where I think a lot of us are uncomfortable, right, in presenting, especially when it's a bit more high stakes. Maybe you're presenting to the client directly. This needs to go well. You're doing like VPs and up, right?
Yep.
So being able to kind of have that space, I think, is actually critical and important actually. So yeah, it's
And
definitely nice. I know I've appreciated it personally.
yeah,
So
it gives you a sounding board of people that might not be the other engineers on your project, right? Like, well, we're all at Rearc, right? You might be talking with, the 3 or 4 engineers that are all on your project. And so you all kind of know what's up. You know the ins and outs of the details of it, and being able to talk to a wider group, that doesn't necessarily have the full background, on that project that you might have, might surface something. It's like, hey, you need to spend a little bit more time talking about, the goals for this project or why this is a problem, right? Because they don't have that inherent, background knowledge. So I think that's useful too, for sure.
yeah, so kind of switching gears a little
Yeah.
bit and back to like the core focus of the COE. I kind of want to talk about maybe some weird or odd things about it, right? So without getting, maybe too much out of scope here, but what's like some of the strange things that have come up in the COE and maybe they weren't useful at all and you're like, man, that was a weird session we had, or maybe they were
Yeah.
very useful, right? Maybe an off topic conversation in office hours actually kind of came around to something where you're like, hey, that's a good idea, right?
I think some of are maybe more interesting or like was that useful sessions where we like try to break something. Where we'll dive into a new Databricks feature and we'll kind of poke a little bit around at like what are some of the weaknesses of this feature, right? Like look past the fancy blog post that describes the feature, look a little bit more in depth and see, what things might be missing or what things might we like to see, added on, right? And sometimes, we'll even discover bugs and things or other things like that as we're kind of talking through a session or seeing, different challenges with it. I know one in particular, we really gave Genie Code its paces when that first came out, in the CUE discussion where we kind of talked through what's it really good at, what are some of the challenges that it had. And I think that was really useful, right? To kind of get together and have that. I think that happened at one of our kind of just open office hours where we were chatting through in particular about Genie Code and kind of figuring out how it works, from a really nitty gritty technical detail standpoint. I think that's been really fun and like it was an interesting conversation. It didn't necessarily lead to any particular outcome, right? There's not some sort of like Genie Code, brick builder that we built out of that conversation, right? But I think it helped, the other engineers think critically about different features and solutions and making sure that they're always kind of diving into how things work, which is useful. Yeah.
Yeah, it almost feels like the way I tend to describe you and the COE to other people is Kevin's like the like cool science teacher that will let you like have fun and build things and break things and all that.
Yeah.
But you still tend to keep things grounded and focused, right? And so I think that's kind of an interesting talent that you've managed to pick up over time with this. And I know myself even, right? I can get very off topic and just yap on about different features and stuff like that. So
Yeah. And I think it's good to have, amount of, it doesn't need to be all seriously focused agenda the whole time, right? Part of the CUE is building, relationships and communication between other engineers. And so definitely like to leave space for that, right? Like let those conversations kind of naturally flow out and happen unless there's, some pressing thing that we need to chat about. Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely feels like you're in that teacher seat, which is kind of funny to think about.
Yeah.
Just to
Really
say,
about it
I
that
think
way
you would make
before,
a
but
great teacher, honestly.
nice.
Babysitting engineers is just like, teaching high schoolers.
Teaching in
It's
class,
the same
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So kind of, moving on to, interesting things about the COE, right? You mentioned kind of like breaking things and stuff like that. How often do you find yourself just kind of wanting to be in that environment where hey, this new thing came out, let's just try to destroy it, right? Let's try all put it through its paces, things like that. Like, is that like a natural thing that you think is kind of coming out of this COE, or is that something that you think you're still kind of like forcing people to kind of dig in and critically think more about?
I think it's something that I would like to see happen naturally. I think we do kind of have to force it at some level, right? Because I don't know, engineers can be a mixed group of people, right? And you got to kind of pull some people out of their shells to kind of have that discussion with. So I think it's still something that we're still kind of working this, nitty gritty thing, or try to tear something apart or figure out how it works, right? Like that's the, engineer in me, right? That really wants to understand how something works. What are the challenges with it, right? It's just finding the time to do that. Which, yeah, I like the open office hour session because like there's no prep. It gives us that space to kind of do that, where someone will bring in something, be like, hey, I was looking at this Databricks Labs project. Has anyone looked at this before? And I'm like, no. Okay, well, we're sitting here on this call. Let's all go look at it for a few minutes, right? And see what we like, what we don't like. Weston, you pitch in and provide your feedback, and others, other champions, will pitch in as well. And whoever, right, is there talking about it. But yeah, no, I definitely, think that we could keep moving those conversations and maybe have another, session besides just the office hours to bring those up.
Yeah, so as we kind of approach towards the end of our time here, I kind of want to take some of the like little nuggets you've been spreading around about all the good things the COE has done for us, everything, why it's worthwhile and stuff, and maybe just kind of spell out, if you were outside of Rearc, right? Take yourself, put yourself in another company, they don't have a COE, and you're kind of seeing engineers struggle, things like that. Is that something you would implement? How would you pitch it? What are kind of like some positives that you would take away and say, hey, this is exactly why others should be doing this as well?
Yeah, no, it's definitely something I would pitch again. The thing that I would start with that pitch with would be talking through like engineer training, because I think that's like the first immediate like benefit of having the COE, is something that we can spin up and implement really quickly, right? Is that you build the group, you help the engineers within your company, get certified, go through the training, figure out what works, for that particular organization in terms of how do we train, how do we support people that are working through the certification process. Is that training materials we develop internally? Is it, external training materials? Whatever, right? Develop that path to be able to get your engineers from, I'm an uncertified data engineer with some experience to, hey, I've got 3 Databricks certs and I have a strong, foundation for which to kind of apply to my future projects. I think that's the immediate kind of value pitch that I would provide to kind of start the COE. And then from there, you kind of evolve into like, okay, let's go beyond training, right? Let's talk through, the solutions that we can kind of package and build, like kind of the brick builders things that we talked about earlier. How do we kind of scale this thing within our org, right? Now that we've, built this center of knowledge, amongst those engineers, and really providing that kind of community more than just kind of training, but like discussion on problems and challenges and things like that. That's kind of my value pitch. That's where I would start, right? Is, build up those engineers for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like you almost have like a blueprint in your head of how to like recreate this, which is awesome. I know it's kind of, to make a joke, it's kind of your baby here, right? And I've seen you definitely like nurture it and let it grow. So it's been awesome. Cool. Well, I think we're about out of time. So Kevin, any last words for anyone watching?
No, it's been fun. I hope you guys, are able to kind of take a little bit about what we do within a Databricks COE and kind of maybe pitch some of those own ideas within your own org. And looking forward to hearing about it. So appreciate it. Thanks, Weston.
Awesome. Well, thanks for watching Streams, Lakes, and Deltas, Not a Nature podcast. And hopefully you took away some good nuggets here. And hey, maybe this is what it took for you to start your own COE. So we'll see you next time.